Hello and welcome to From the Beer Hole End. This is the preview of our cup tie against Reading. We'll be keeping that short. We did quite a bit on that in the last pod, but a few other items to be discussing, of course. We'll be having a chat in a little while about the contract situation of Egan Riley, who that came up in Scott Parker's press conference. A few other little bits of injury news came out of that as well. And we'll also be talking about our former manager, who, of course, is in the headlines after he was sacked by Everton. I'm Simon Evans. With me is Paul Woodhouse. We've had a flu bug run rife through the pod squad, leaving me and Woody to look ahead to this weekend's game. So we know that you don't want to hear too much of our voices, so we'll keep it nice and tight this one. Woody, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. I'm glad you've not fallen foul of this flu bug. But poor old Greaves is in his sick bed.
Bless him. He's got a poor constitution, as that boy.
Yeah,
allegedly. Yeah,
struggling. Right. So we heard today that it did feel almost inevitable, didn't it, that Everton pulled the trigger on our former manager, Sean Dyche. Let's talk about that first, because it's a big talking point, and there's a lot of Burnley fans. I know he's not our manager, and there'll be some people say, why is a Burnley podcast talking about somebody who used to be our manager? But he's so connected with a lot of our experience of being Burnley fans, isn't he? And he's still widely liked and respected amongst 99% of Burnley fans, I would say. It's a bit sad that it hasn't worked out the way he would have wanted at Everton, but it somehow feels like it's not a massive surprise either.
Well, it's one of those things that you knew was coming, especially after the takeover. But the timing of it currently is pretty poor. You know, you look at the set of results through December, and you've got beating Wolves 4-0 at home. Then the derby was postponed, wasn't it? Against Arsenal away was 0-0. Chelsea at home 0-0, and then at City 1 apiece. Now that's not sacking form. It might be if you're top 4, but this is Everton. You know, and at the moment, Everton, the only reason why they're outside of the relegation zone is because of Sean Dyche. The only person you'd probably be looking at bringing in to save them from this particular, turmoil that they've been in constantly. Because you can't really see Everton all of a sudden. How much money are they planning on spunking in January? What is their actual plan? Is it going to be kind of a little bit of a pace type plan? We'll jettison and see what happens, because we've seen what happens. And you can see that Everton, but for the grace of God, could go in, they could quite easily not see a bump out of this, couldn't they? I don't suddenly see how this Everton side suddenly starts playing beautiful flowing football between now and February, And so in that regard, it's a shocking, it's an appalling decision. Really is. You would have thought give him till the end of the season, have a chat. Even he knew he was probably on his way out, didn't he?
Yeah, he would have felt something, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. But it just feels that also the timing of this at this particular point in time just feels probably a little bit knee-jerk. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it. It's 4 defeats in the last 14 or 15 games, I think. That Everton-Liverpool game was postponed. But it's 2 back-to-back at the end. Defeat at home to Notts Forest, who are one of the form teams of the division at the moment, and then a 1-0 loss at Bournemouth. Now, a 1-0 loss at Bournemouth's not great, but for a team that's in the bottom half of the league, 4 out of 15 defeats is not that bad, is it? And
absolutely not. And like you say, they both form sides. You take into consideration the other draws and whatnot, and he's doing his job. it's a little bit perplexing. I think he's been harshly done to, because he is one of these. He's being obviously pigeonholed into one of these types of managers who only plays a certain way, can only do certain things, and can only park the bus and keep sides just outside of the relegation zone. And sometimes you may find yourself mid-table. But Everton aren't any better than that, are they? They're not. I mean, yes, they're expecting bigger and better things, obviously, and they need to be moving on.
You mean with the players that he's got at his disposal?
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't change overnight, does it? He has a...
No, I mean, I suppose the people who supported this decision or who made this decision would say it makes more sense to change your manager before the January window gets into full flow, rather than these decisions we sometimes see where a club goes out and spends 60 million in January window and then sacks a bloke in early February.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose it gives the new man a chance to bring in some players and do it. But on the other hand, how many clubs have changed their style of play while in the bottom six in the Premier League and come out of it with everyone saying, oh, we actually ended the season playing really attractive football?
Yeah.
It seems a risky thing to do to me.
It does. I mean, it'd be interesting. It will. And at least now we can go back to, hating Everton properly. So I don't know. I wouldn't mind one of the bigger sides. It would be quite funny to see Everton really get sucked into a proper relegation scrap now, and maybe even go down. Because they're an unpleasant bunch at times, aren't they?
Yeah, the fans there, they get on the back of that team something chronic. I mean, they have done for all the managers. I mean, they didn't give Koeman much leeway, did they? And they were soon. And when they turn against their own players at Goodison, it can be really evil.
It's nasty, isn't it? And they turn. It gets very vitriolic. And on the other hand as well, when they're behind him, they're genuinely behind him, and they are. They're a big. They are a big club, and they should be. Somewhere above the top half. They shouldn't be where they are.
No.
It's ridiculous. But they've got themselves into that position, haven't they? And it's via mismanagement. And they can't just flip a switch on it.
I just wonder if it's the new owner syndrome, part of it, where they come in and they think, and especially with the new stadium for next season, and they think to themselves, you know what? I mean, the bookmaker's favourite to get that job now is Mourinho, which is going to be an interesting one. But they if that happens, but you can see why a new American owner's coming in would think, you know what? We need some momentum going into the new stadium. We've got a legendary manager like Mourinho in charge. He takes us to mid-table at the end of this season and everyone's fired up. We're going to our new stadium with Mourinho leading us out, and suddenly it's the new era at Everton. Whereas if Sean Dyche is there and they just scrap and just stay up, then what kind of atmosphere would there be for the start of the next season? Well, you could change him at the end of the season. I think it's crazy to do it in the middle of the season.
Yeah, and what you're getting with Mourinho, other than Dyche is basically the poor man's Mourinho, isn't he? In a lot of regards.
In the part of the bus sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Now they've just got a professional bus parker. And it's, but it's like, how many players does he want and how many players does he get in and all that kind of stuff. I've always felt a bit sorry for Dyche in that he's never really been given the money. I would like to see him get a job where he's given at least some purse strings to pull and tinker with, rather than always being given a relatively shit hand. So
keep fighting to keep aside in the Premier League, and then being given the boot when the Americans promising to spend money take over is not a new experience for Sean Dyche, is it?
Exactly. And I'm sure he'll bounce back and he'll be rather sanguine about it. And at the end of the day, it's what he does, isn't it? But I'm sure there's a part of him that really wouldn't mind a budget of some description to have a play with, and I'd like to see him with a budget, because he can play reasonable football. He's a pragmatic manager, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's not that he's about parking the bus. He's about getting the best and surviving in the Premier League.
Although I do wonder if he hasn't started to a little bit at Everton, sort of, he always disliked the stereotyping of him, understandably. But I wonder if he just wasn't a little bit overcautious as well. I was talking to someone today at a media event I was at, a broadcaster working here in the States, not an American, and he said that he'd done a long interview with Dyche a while back and said what a fantastic bloke, what an absolutely top man. And when they finished the interview, they had a really long chat about stuff. Well, our mate Chris would know all about that, having talked about music and films and comedy and all sorts of stuff with him after those press conferences at Gawthorpe. A guy who really, really likes Dyche, really rates him, appreciated what he did at Burnley, understood the realities at Everton, but also said they were pretty bloody dour to watch this year, Yes. And there could have, did he not have a bit? He did have a bit of creativity in that squad. I mean, he had Dwight McNeil, he had Dacour, and other players. He could have taken the handbrake off a bit. But Dyche will tell you, as well, that over how many seasons have we looked awful at this time of year, and then he's turned it around in the second half of the season. I mean, he did that on 2 or 3 occasions with Burnley, didn't he? Where it picked up after some tweak or some change or something, and he'll never know. But do you think that this is like a fatal blow to Sean Dyche, Premier League manager, though? Do you think that some club in the Premier League is going to take a punt on Dyche, or is he going to have to resign himself now to coming back through the Championship?
Well, he's a new Big Sam, isn't he? That's what he's either going to wind up being the guy who just about saves clubs from relegation, or he's going to do the yo-yo thing. That's pretty much what he's going to turn into, isn't it? And that's how he's going to be pigeonholed. And we'll see. We'll see what his next move is. But I can see exactly what you're saying. He's not going to get some up and coming squad to suddenly play some expansive football with, is he? He's going to be saving a side. He's going to be getting, he'll probably wind up getting a Southampton type job or whatever. Although I don't think he'd take something along those lines. But if something like a Wolves job came up or something along those lines, he might do a job there.
You can't see it this year, really, can you? But
no.
What I'd like to see him do, and I'm not sure, and he might surprise people and do something like this. I would love to see Dyche go abroad and work. I really would, and I don't care where. I'd like to, go and test himself in Serie A if he got a chance, or go to the Bundesliga, or go
entertaining, wouldn't it?
Or even come over here to MLS. I would love to see him go and do something somewhere else with a completely different environment, a different set of players. I mean, MLS would be an absolute treat for him with no relegation. I mean, if you need an environment where you can take the handbrake off and go and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, what we're doing, parking the short bus, or
Dean Smith's loving it over here, and he's a similar sort of manager in some ways. That maybe his career had reached that point where perhaps he'd had his chances for a while. But you just think if he goes to another league, whether it's here or somewhere in Europe, and just enjoys it a little bit away from that like mad pressure, and just going into a different environment with a different group of players, and proving to everyone that he can work with a totally different dressing room and stuff. I'd love to see him try and do that. I think that would be really interesting. I don't think it'd, if it didn't work out for him, I don't think it would necessarily like be a big black mark against him either. I mean, Parker's bounced back pretty well from being not lasting very long in the Belgian league, did he?
No. So I think that's a fair shout. And I think, to be fair, the more I think about it, the MLS makes a heck of a lot of sense. It really does. How well do you know Dean Smith?
Yeah, you know what? Just had a horrible thought. Apologies to some of our listeners who have no interest whatsoever in MLS, but I've just spent all day with people from MLS today, so it's a bit in my mind. But there is actually a vacancy in MLS at the moment. but it's the most disastrous club that keep finishing in bottom three despite spending loads of money. Is Toronto FC. Well,
there you go.
They're looking for a manager. Ooh, but yeah, he probably wants a break now, doesn't he? He probably wants a break and assess things. But he is a top man, though. He is an absolute top man. I know, we laugh about Chris bringing up these references. And the reason why Chris brings up all these references is because Chris, home and away, week in, week out, was covering Burnley. And for basically the best part of a decade when Sean Dyche was bringing Burnley some of their best years, really. I mean, what to get us, I know we've said this a million times, but to get us into the Europa League, I still have to pinch myself sometimes to think we were back in European football.
It's insane what he managed to do. And it wasn't his fault at the end. It genuinely wasn't.
No.
He was still doing a sterling job considering they'd completely cut all money off for him because they were preparing to sell.
Yeah,
he became a victim of that as much as anything, as he's arguably a victim of this particular takeover as well. But how can you argue? Like you say, it's ridiculous that he got us into the Europa League. Absolutely preposterous.
Yeah.
In a lot of regards, we'll probably never see it again. We'll probably never see it again.
Maybe, who knows? One can only hope. But he's gone from having to manage a team with Mike Garlick not giving him a penny and not giving him the time of day, according to some accounts, but not giving him a penny to spend on players and that whole Dale Stevens situation, and still keeping us up. He went from that situation and then getting sacked when the new owners came in to a situation with Moshiri, who had no money to really invest, and a club that was trying to sell itself, couldn't sell itself for a long time with deals that were falling through. And then finally they get a new ownership comes in and the fans don't want him. And so the new owner makes a populist move and decides to get rid of him. So I feel sorry for him. And the only bright thing about it is that he's now freed from his responsibilities, Premier League club, and he's free to come on from the be-all end and do a mega 3-part series, The Dyche Years, with us. Because he's done all these high-performance podcast things with Jake Humphries and all the rest of it. Coach's voice talking about it. Come on and tell us what it were really like, Sean.
Yes.
Come on. We'll do it.
That's his next move.
That's his next move. Right. Talking about contracts and so on, was Scott Parker today in his press conference was asked about the situation with CJ Egan Riley, who is in that position now of having established himself unexpectedly as our starting centre-half alongside Maxime Esteve. I'm tired of calling him E-Steve. Let's call him by his proper name now. Alongside Maxime Esteve, with his contract running out at the end of this season, which means, technically, club's going to be approaching him now to start talking about things in January. And at the end of the season, he could leave the club for nothing. Now, none of us would have been the slightest bit surprised if last summer he'd have left for nothing. Probably would have got barely a mention on this podcast. But now the idea of losing him is quite an unpalatable thought, isn't it? Parker says it is a priority for them and they've got to try and sort it out, but it hadn't been sorted out. What's going on, do you reckon?
I don't think there's anything necessarily going on. I think it's more of a case like if you'd have said, like we're just saying, if you'd have said during the summer that, we'd have been panicking round about January about CJ Egan Riley not signing a new contract, people would have laughed at you. But that goes to show what a bloody good season he's had so far. And unless he's been thinking that he's got greener pastures elsewhere, I'd sincerely hope that we get him on a dotted line and we give him pretty much what he needs and what he wants within reason. Although Parker did temper it a little bit by saying he's still got a lot of mistakes and a lot of things to sort out. He didn't get too effusive with his praise. He still kept him grounded with his comments, but he knows perfectly damn well what a good player he is.
Yeah, it needs sorting, doesn't it? And but the power's in his hand now as well. I mean, his agent might be saying to him, "Hey, you don't need to sign anything. Wait and see where these lads end up. If they're in the Premier League and you've been a star performer week in, week out in an unbelievably tight defence that's just got them promoted to the Premier League, they need to give you a really good contract then for the Premier League. And if they don't, somebody else will."
Exactly. But I mean, it's modern football, isn't it? And he deserves. I think arguably he deserves that. He deserves getting paid what he's worth. But it's one of those stick or twist, isn't it? Are you sure you're going to be Are you sure you're going to be kind of going up and hang out a little bit for a Premier League contract, or do you sign on that dotted line now for another 5 years with your wonderful, glorious little escape clauses and whatnot? I don't know.
Yeah, plenty of work for the agent to go through there. Really, it's quite a tricky situation for a player as well, because they've always to take into account, well, what happens if I get injured next week and I'm out for 6 months? And we've got plenty of players like that, unfortunately. And Scott Parker was talking about a few of those. Some positive news in the sense that Manuel Benson and Nathan Redmond have returned to training. And yes, Scott Parker did indeed use the words "on the grass." Jordan Bayer, of course, was on social media recently saying he's made a major step in his recovery from a long-term knee injury. We really do need some positive news about Jordan Bayer. What a fantastic player he is. And if he can get himself fit, and we can get ourselves promoted, he's a player you think could have a tremendous season next year. Aaron Ramsey's heading in the right direction is the language being used. He hasn't played since February, but doesn't sound like that's super near. And Mike Trezor, according to the Burnley Express, remains a doubt, having not featured at all this season. Benson's not available. Doesn't sound like they're going to be ready to leap from being on the grass to playing against Reading, though.
Yeah. No, there were no real hints at anybody's in contention for the weekend. But he did speak of Ramsey, and I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong on this particular point, that it sounded like Masengo was allowed to go out on loan because it seemed like some of these folks were on the grass a little bit more and moving in the right direction, are going to be in contention shortly-ish. So we shall see.
What do you think about that Masengo thing, really? Because, I mean, Greavesy were a massive fan of Masengo, and I think we all thought in the glimpses he got, those moments he got earlier on in the season, he looked quite useful.
It's one of those, and you would have expected him to play this weekend, wouldn't you? You would have thought, yeah. And I think he had one really, really good performance when I think he finally played in the middle as a two when Brownhill went off and he just played with Cullen. I think I've forgotten who it was against, and he looked like a player. He sometimes was a little bit chicken with no head, but he had a certain vibrancy about him. He could run, he could get his foot, and he weren't the worst passer of a ball either. But you could tell that there was, it was a little bit of a rough diamond. So it probably makes sense that instead of him just pissing about on the grass up Gothorpe, it makes more sense for him to play some cultured stuff over at Auxerre.
Yeah, that's right. He's gone to Auxerre, who are 9th in Ligue 1. So, he's gone to a team in the mid-table in the French First Division. Go and get that under his belt, and then I presume he's still under contract after that. I can't remember whether he's got his contract's up this year or if he's got another year. I think he has another year, I think.
Yeah, but I'd have to get him on free. Yeah.
It is a shame to see him go, but it makes sense what you're saying, really. If those players are coming back and he's going to drop even further down the pecking order. The other thing Scott Parker was saying was that there's a pretty big chance that it sounded like, anyway, that we might get a look at our Peruvian right back, Oliver Son, who's kind of Peruvian, until he's eligible for Peru,
Yes.
but played his football in Scandinavia, where he's grown up. Did sound from the sort of effusive comments from Scott Parker like we might have a look at him at Reading.
He sounds tied on for the weekend in some capacity. He did sound quite excited about him, and he seemed to rate him in his press conference. So that means he'll probably have an absolute shocker come Saturday. But it will be nice to see, what he's like. And obviously, it sounds like he's jumped ahead of young Sambo. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see the lineup at Reading. Reading on not a bad run of form.
They're sixth, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think
they've picked up 3 or 4 wins recently. So, depends. But these days in the FA Cup, I mean, it's bizarre that you get, Championship and League One teams playing against teams in the higher division, and they rest them as well. They rest players and rotate as well. So who knows what side we're getting to. I still find it really sad that the FA Cup's like this. But, even people like us say, well, the priority is promotion and the Championship. And if people like us are saying it, you're fighting a losing battle, hoping that everyone's going to put out a full-strength side and go hell for leather to get into the next round of the Cup. I wish we could have those old FA Cup days back, but they've long gone, haven't they, unfortunately? But it does give us that sort of opportunity at the weekend to have a look at some of these players. I would imagine we could see some Joe Worrell, some Egan. Because imagine those two playing at the back, or certainly one of them.
I mean, it's still going to wind up being a very good side when you think about it, isn't it? Even if you bring Perez in, you got Son and like whatever you choose as your centre half pairing, wouldn't have been inconceivable for our starting centre half pairing. So whatever goes on in the middle of the park, whoever he plays out wide and, shoves somebody, whoever he shoves up front. So
I'd imagine it might be a good chance to give Foster 90 minutes or something close to 90 minutes, get some real football under his belt. He's only had a couple of little sub cameos, hasn't he?
Yeah. In fact, when you think about it, we probably aren't putting out that much of a weak side, considering. We'll probably see what our strength in depth actually genuinely is like. But like you say, it makes a lot of sense for Foster to start and get some match minutes, get himself match fit. So it'd be probably extremely useful in that regard, especially if he bags. Bless him.
Yep. So we've got that to look forward to at the weekend. And I'm also quite curious to see like Stanley against Liverpool.
Yes.
That'll be... I've got a soft spot for Stanley, like quite a lot of us have. Yeah.
But you can just imagine, all the young pups as endless runs of that bloody advert are just thrown out there, and they're just looking at it, thinking, "What are these old dicks on about now?" But that is the whiff of nostalgia that we're talking about, isn't it?
The bit of modern British reality is that the lad who said the famous words "Accrington Stanley, who are they?" is serving time for murder. So,
there you go. Exactly. That's about right, doesn't it?
Brilliant. Right. Well, there it is. Another episode in the bag. We'll be back on Monday to review what happened in the FA Cup and any other news. And hopefully the team has recuperated from this virus that's caused havoc amongst the pod squad, and hope you're all keeping well despite the horrible weather. Keep yourself in good shape, enjoy the game of the weekend, and up the Clarets.